budget vote for the department that will be tabled this afternoon. If I may introduce the panel to you, closest to me, Mr. Mulo Moswale, who is the new Deputy Minister, Public Enterprises.
Thank you.
Please applaud him, you know.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
Next to him, Mr. Pravin Gordhan. Judging by the number of media inquiries we received, you might think he's the Minister of the Public Protector, but he's not. He's the Minister of Public Enterprises.
Yeah, I gotta get that right.
And next to him is Mr. Tuto Shumang. He's the Acting Director General for the department. I hand over to you, Minister. Thank you. Not involved.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here. Let me also recognize the chairpersons, CEOs, board members, and management members of the various SOEs that report to us as the Department of Public Enterprises. As you know, today is our budget vote, but I'm sure you're going to have other questions as well. We have 45 minutes or so for this press conference, which should end at about 3:15, so that Minister Patel, with whom I'm sharing some time, can then take over. It might be of interest to you, which I'll mention in my speech later, that the Rivonia trial was some 55 years ago. Started on the 9th of October 1963 and ended on the 12th of June 1964. It's 55 years ago. It's 55 years ago when principal leaders and activists of the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party, and indeed the trade union movement and the underground more generally, were arrested, prosecuted, and jailed not too far from here at Robben Island. And the kind of sacrifices they made, the kind of aspirations that they set for themselves, the movement, and indeed all South Africans, is worth remembering today, because in the context of SOEs and state capture, we've moved quite a distance away from the kind of aspirations that many of them spent 20 to 27 years in jail for. And of course, there were lots of other political prisoners as well. The second point I want to make is often the word state capture doesn't quite reflect the cost, both in money terms, but in, let's call it qualitative terms as well. So over the past year or so, at the department, we've brought together forensic reports from different entities which total close to 3,000 forensic reports. Not all of them have been acted upon. Not all of them have been properly investigated by the criminal justice system. But at some stage or the other, those who have been identified as being culpable for stealing money from the state and these institutions, and indeed undermining the state-owned entities, which play a very important role in our economy and in our country, need to be held to account. So if you look at some of the numbers, the locomotive deal at Transnet alone, over and above the actual cost, we probably lost somewhere around 7 or 8 billion rands. In relation to South African Airways and South African Express, something like 5 or 6 billion rands in irregular leases and overcharging in spares. At Eskom, I think they're still getting on top of their numbers, but billions of rands potentially could have been lost in the procurement processes as well. Consulting firms like Regiments and Trillion have made lots of money, could total another billion or so as well. That's the financial side. But you could add to that the kind of damage that has been done, for example, to the South African Revenue Service, as a result of which, as I'm sure Minister Mboweni will point out later today, we face the kind of fiscal constraints that we face, and anything between 30 and 50 billion rands in revenue has been lost as a result of the damage done in that context as well. Of course, lots of others have been involved in this process. whether it's consulting firms like Bain and McKinsey, accounting firms like KPMG, legal firms, other firms that offer so-called treasury services, all of which, together with the kind of mismanagement that we saw, the negligence on the part of previous boards, the lack of fiduciary accountability by those boards, all of that caused immense amount of damage. Early last year, the President set out a clear agenda for SOEs. You've heard about that. Get them on the right kind of footing, get their operations working, make them less dependent upon the fiscus, which hasn't quite happened yet, but hopefully we're getting there shortly. And in many instances, look at the business models of these entities in order that we could find a way to make them a lot more sustainable than they are. In the course of the last 18 months, boards have changed, chairpersons have been appointed, management people have been brought into various management positions in the different SOEs, and amongst them have been very brave people like Mr. Hadebe, who's sitting quietly there in the corner, who had the massive responsibility of getting Eskom on the right kind of footing, at least financially, together with the chairperson of the board, Mr. Mabuza, who's here with his idiosyncratic hat. I don't know what they call it these days, but nonetheless. The financial year that we are looking at is, of course, the 2019-2020 financial year. And the question that we need to ask is, what will be different, A, for the remainder of this financial year, but B, in relation to what we want to build on as the future, firstly, the governance model. So increasingly, the department will be changing, and hopefully in a very short period of time, the kind of governance model that we've been working with, so that shareholder compacts, memoranda of incorporation, strategic intent statements that emerge from the department on behalf of the shareholder all have real content and meaning in terms of the kind of fiduciary accountability that boards have to take responsibility for. So increasingly, what we want to see in SOEs are independent boards that understand the nature of the business, they understand the nature of the operations of the entity involved, understand the financial constraints that we work under as government as a whole, and help us to think through and set a different path for these SOEs. So governance and accountability, and we'll give you more details about that in the next couple of weeks, we'll see some changes in the way in which interactions take place between SOEs and the department. Secondly, within the department itself, of course, we have to recognize that this department was one of the key centers of state capture. You had to capture this department to make sure that the right board members were appointed. You had to capture this department in order to ensure that the right management, right meaning inverted commas, right management, had to be put in place so that procurement and other systems could be managed in an appropriate way to lend substance and credence to the state capture project. And so within the department itself, we have to build over the next 6 to 9 months a lot of expertise, which will enable us to have real day-to-day oversight over what happens in entities, but also, as boards would expect in the private sector, hold the boards accountable for the performance, and in particular the operational and financial performance of the entities actually involved. The third thing is that in many of the instances, there are a number of extraneous factors that are beginning to impact upon the environment in which businesses such as SOEs operate. So I'll give you one example. Take Transnet. Transnet is going to be impacted because of increasing protectionism, which I'm sure Minister Patel might talk about a little later, emanating from the US in particular, but elsewhere as well. Secondly, it will be impacted by the made-in phenomenon. Everybody wants to make it in the US or India or wherever the case might be, which means that the trade patterns are going to actually change. Production patterns are actually going to change. The nature of the cargo that moves around the world is actually going to change as well. And all of this is going to be a disruptive factor as far as, for example, shipping is concerned and the manner in which containers move around the world as well. There are similar phenomena taking place on the energy side. The transition from fossil fuel-based energy to clean emissions and renewables, and the manner in which that transition takes place, taking into account the impact that it would have on communities and workers, for example, in current power stations. But that energy transition, the nature of the grids, the so-called smart grids, all of those phenomena, including separating Eskom into its three components, generation, transmission, and distribution, is going to involve and result in different business models. So we expect boards not only to attend to the immediate business at hand, but also to ensure that they begin to think ahead, and in the next 6 to 9 months, prepare new business or alternate business models, or give some thought to that, so that the shareholder, i.e. the government, can apply its mind to the kind of developments that they have actually come up with. Linked to that will be the question of financial sustainability, that each of the SOEs we expect would also present to us, often in very difficult circumstances, how they're going to become financially sustainable over a period of time. The President said at the outset last year, repeated it earlier this year as well, that SOEs should not use the fiscus as a piggy bank. Whenever you're in trouble, go to government or go to government for guarantees so that you can borrow money from private banks. Somewhere along the line, in the next year to 2 years, we've got to find a way in which these SOEs become self-sustaining in a financial sense as well. But increasingly, there are two areas that SOEs need to apply their minds to a lot more consciously and look at external factors rather than just their internal operations. The first, which you'll hear at least two of my colleagues talk about today, is in relation to reducing the cost of business and the cost of living in South Africa. You've heard many complaints, and legitimately so, about high tariffs that are charged both at ports on the one hand and from the electricity sector on the other hand. Although if you look at it from the Eskom point of view, those tariffs are necessary in order to balance its books. So how do we resolve this contradiction is something that you will hear a lot more about in the next couple of weeks. The President, as you know, and just to remind you, has said that we need to prepare a paper on Eskom, which would tell the country in the next few weeks exactly where are we taking Eskom, what are some of the changes that we can actually anticipate, and how are the financial elements of those changes going to impact both on Eskom but on the country as a whole as well. But the cost of doing business is a key factor in the competitiveness of any economy. And so to the extent to which we can work together with all the parties concerned to manage costs is the extent to which our economy can begin to boost itself as well. The second area in relation to the economy is increasing inclusivity and jobs through increased investment in the economy itself. Each of the entities have the capacity to invest in infrastructure, for example, although the big and mega projects are largely over, there are still key parts of the country, like where my colleague comes from, the Eastern Cape, where new railway lines could make a huge difference to farmers getting access to markets, for example. That applies to other parts of the country as well. So increasing investment, crowding in the private sector to co-invest with the state, training professionals so that we have highly qualified people in each of the entities, both at an operational level but also at a management level, particularly black professionals, is going to be a critical task that many of our entities used to do pretty well at, and more recently have had some difficulties with. We've also, in the final instance, in relation to the economy, got to look at how do we promote local manufacturing. And that is, how do you link procurement processes of the state to the creation of new businesses? If the same old businesses are doing the same old business with the SOEs, we're making no difference in the economy. What you want is a multiplication of businesses, more enterprises, more enterprising people, more entrepreneurs who are able to then relate to the state and use the state procurement process in order to create more enterprises, which in themselves will then begin to create more jobs. The jobs, as we all know, are not going to be created by the large corporates in South Africa. They're going to be created by the small and medium-sized corporates in our country. Local procurement and localization is an important project as well, as far as government is concerned. And again, I think our entities have a key responsibility in this particular regard. Let me round up by just covering what we're going to say briefly about some of the entities. The first question I'm sure that is uppermost in your minds is about Eskom. The Minister of Finance, who delivers his budget vote speech later today at I think 6 or 6:15, will give some indication of what he has in mind in relation to the special appropriation bill that the President spoke about. Secondly, the paper on Eskom itself has commenced. We've commenced work on that particular paper and got a whole lot of role players together. And should we have a draft available pretty soon for government to actually look at. Thirdly, the board itself of Eskom and indeed some of the other entities need to be strengthened, both at a technical level in relation to the particular businesses that they're involved in, but also from a corporate finance and audit point of view as well. So those will be some of the changes that you will see on the Eskom side. I'm sure one of you or one or other of you is going to ask, how much is the Treasury going to put into that bill? I don't know. So before you ask the question, let me tell you that. Nor does Mr. Mabuza, so don't try to ambush him a little bit later. As far as Transnet is concerned, they've started the process of hiring a CFO, CEO, and a CIO, amongst others, and that board is pretty much in control of what is going on. Regrettably, what we're getting are reports of go slow at some of our ports, which is beginning to impact on the export of vehicles from South Africa in particular, but perhaps other commodities as well. And this is a regrettable development because it then begins to impact on jobs and the economy more generally as well. And we expect the Transnet board to apply its mind to what is going on in that particular regard as well. On the airlines, both the airlines, SAX and SAA, except for Mango, are finding themselves in difficulty at the moment. And a large part of their difficulty arises from liquidity challenges. But I want to compliment the current interim management that is in place on the good work that they're doing to stabilize the situation. And we hope that we can give you better news as far as these entities are concerned later in the year. Denel is attracting a lot of business from various parts of the world, and its order book has now grown, and the Deputy Minister will give you some details in his presentation at the budget vote debate. So some 30 to 40 billion rands of order books have been developed as far as Denel is concerned, and that should be of assistance to them, provided that they can get some liquidity to get the business in order. So in sum, ladies and gentlemen, over the last year, I think we've succeeded in getting some elements of governance right as far as boards are concerned. Key management positions in some of our entities have been filled, yet others will be filled over the next couple of months. Thirdly, a lot of attention has been paid, and more attention needs to be paid to the operations of each of these businesses so that we know exactly what is going on the ground and how we improve efficiencies. and make the contribution, as I said, that we need to make as far as the economy itself is concerned as well. Financially, many of them are in dire straits or in relative difficulty of one kind or another, and over time the boards will be able to develop the sustainability model that I talked about earlier on and give us more time to focus on developing alternate ideas about these businesses and also alternate ideas about how we make them a lot more efficient and, if you like, profit-making, rather than the kind of crisis management that we've had to do over the last year or so. All in all, the SOEs can play and should play an important role in the economy, particularly the bigger SOEs that we are talking about, and I'm confident that given a bit of time, and if the fight back against the kind of changes that we are trying to make to stop the malfeasance, to get rid of the corruption, to clean up the procurement lines, to get the cost structures in each of these entities appropriately balanced. If we get that right, without the kind of interference that we're seeing at the moment, then we should be on a pretty good footing in the next 18 to 24 months. And that is why exposing the fight back, exposing the proponents of the fight back is an extremely important thing for the public to understand and for us to do. And we call on all good South Africans to join us in making sure that these important assets of the state become productive on the one hand and become positive contributors to our economy on the other hand. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you. Being mindful of the time, we'll take questions. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. That's the first round. Please identify yourself and the institutions that you are from. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Minister. Paul Vikiato from Bloomberg. Earlier this year in the budget vote debates, I believe you, the Finance Minister, talked about a list of assets that the states, or non-core assets the states may consider to dispose of. How far has that process gone? Can you give us any idea how many assets, what kind of assets, and when you think this will start, and how much revenue you think you'll get? Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Wendell from Reuters. Are you still planning to appoint the restructuring officer at Eskom in this month? While I understand you don't know what Treasury will give, could you please indicate what you've asked for?
Clever one.
And then lastly, if you could just give us an update on the Chinese loan, or what seems to be the hassle there, and when will you guys be able to access it in full? And how will it work? Is it going to be the first tranche of X by Y, if possible? Thanks.
We have an honorary Chinese citizen here, but we'll come back to that. You heard that question.
Maria Merton from Daily Maverick, partly covered by Wendell's questions, but you did throw to the Finance Minister with regards to the Special Appropriations Bill and the paper. Let me ask you this: how far is the process, and what are the timeframes you're looking at on that, particularly in light of Eskom's financials that are due 22nd of July, thereabouts? The other question was with regards to Denel, and perhaps we could have an explanation or a comment on the trade union claim, as reported by Bloomberg, that Denel management has dipped into workers' pension funds and social savings in order to keep the arms manufacturer going. Thank you.
It was you.
Thank you very much, Minister. My name is Vuyani Green from SABC. In your briefing, you've made reference to proponents of the fight back, and those who are guilty of wrongdoing should be held to account. But your political detractors would argue that what's good for the goose is also good for the gander, and that you must also be held to account. We understand that you filed a review application, and of interest to me, you've cited the public protector and also the third respondent. I think it's Busisiwe Mkhwebane. Why did you draw a distinction between the public protector and Busisiwe Mkhwebane in your application? And secondly, why did you cite the President as a respondent as well as the Speaker of the National Assembly? Thank you.
Hi, Minister. Claudia Maidovich from Business Day. I just wanted to find out with regards to the boards, you said it would have to be strengthened like on a technical level and in terms of the corporate finance and audit side as well. Can we expect wholesale changes at the boards, especially at ESCOM? Or will it be minor changes being made? And then just in terms of, you spoke about crisis control, right, in the state of finances at the SOEs. We saw at, I think, yeah, it was at the Denel in which you had to jump in basically and help pay salaries. Is there specifically something that's being done that for the foreseeable future that the employees at state-owned enterprises can be assured of their salaries? Or is this a case of you take it month by month, which I assume would be quite a destabilizing effect on the actual employees then? Thank you.
You can read it out. So, Mr. Lakay will give you that answer to the Denel pension fund issue. He has a statement in front of him from Denel.
Also, the loan they managed to negotiate last month was done by Denel management, no intervention here. But as far as the employees' pension fund contributions, there is a statement ready. They acknowledge that for June 2019, because of the liquidity problems, they didn't make the employee contributions to the fund. There's a commitment from the management that they will pay whatever is due, and that they are communicating with both organized labor and the employees to give them that assurance. The statement is here, and I can distribute it to anyone who would require it, but the company has prepared a position in that, on that aspect. Thank you.
Okay, for the rest, let's see how we can help you. Non-core assets, for our part, we've submitted a list, and I think I'm not sure whether Mr. Mboweni is doing a press conference later, but if he is, perhaps you can ask him where we are in the process. But sooner or later, I think as a state, we have to confront the reality that there's limited amount of money available from the normal revenue sources, and that we will have to do something extraordinary to bring in more resources into the state, either in the form of non-core assets, or as has been suggested by many, including ourselves in government, by getting the appropriate kind of partnerships between government and the private sector as well. And if you remember, earlier on I spoke about crowding in the private sector as far as investment is concerned. On the CRO, that's Wendell still under discussion, but hopefully sooner rather than later, we'd like to give, together with the board of ESCON, the public the clarity that is required on all of those issues that you've actually mentioned. I'm not sure if Mr. Mabuza would like to comment on the Chinese loan. I'm not on top of that. As I said, he's an honorary Chinese citizen for a short while.
Minister, thank you very much. Just a short answer. Yeah, I just got back from China on another matter yesterday. We have met the China Development Bank, and we have explained they had a lot of questions, as could be understood. Been a lot of moving parts about ESCOM, so they just needed to gain an understanding of one, the issues we're dealing with, the unbundling, and indeed they needed some answers about the changes in the leadership. And I think we should be fine. We have given them all the necessary answers, and there's an understanding and the support of the direction we're taking.
Okay. So that covers Wendell's questions. On the Marian, special appropriation bill, I think we did say in the SONA debate that before the end of the month you will see some indication from the Treasury. But again, Minister Mboweni will give you an idea later this evening, so we've covered Denel as well. Claudia, on the question of boards, I think several of them have vacancies. The ESCOM board, for example, has 3 of them, so we'll fill those. But we'll also have to review boards in some of the other entities to see whether we have the right sector expertise. That's one of the things that we find that there's a bit of a gap in some of the areas. In other words, if you're dealing with the transport sector, have you got enough people who understand shipping or rail logistics or whatever the case is? If you're dealing with airlines, do you have enough people on the board who understand the dynamics of the airline industry or aviation industry? And that's another rapidly changing and developing sector of transport as well. So we'll take one at a time and have a look at what's going on. Danelle, and I mean, we would like to be in a position where all workers in all entities are assured of their salaries. At the same time, I think workers, management, boards, and ourselves need to be aware of the kind of constraints that we work with as well, in terms of the financial state that many of these entities were left in. And Mr. Green, I didn't leave them in that condition. You see, they were left there by those who are now before the Zondo Commission and other commissions as well. And I'll come back to your point in a moment. So we have to go about repairing these entities, and that's where the boards of these various entities that were appointed during the course of last year in particular have to be given a lot of credit for being brave enough to serve on these boards, for being brave enough to expose the malfeasance in many of these entities and act on them as well, and to also those who responded to the Tumamina call and took on acting CFO positions and CEO positions in order to help us steer. Some of them are present, so they know who I'm talking about, to help us to steer past some of the difficulties that we've actually had. So hopefully sooner rather than later, everyone can be assured that the entities find themselves in a position where their salaries can be paid. On Mr. Green's question, I'm actually surprised that you want to equate me and the investigations that the public protector and the complaints that she's investigating, equate me to people who committed 7 billion rands of fraud at Transnet, or cooked up the optimum coal supply chain at Eskom, or falsely agreed to the kind of deals they agreed with McKinsey, or what they did to the Revenue Service together with Bain. I mean, there's no equation between the two. So let me make it absolutely clear that I am a committed constitutionalist and a contributor to the public sector for many, many years, and will continue to actually do so. The reason on legal advice that we draw a distinction between the public protector as the office and the public protector as the person, I think is a very important distinction, because you can have many structures that are defined in a constitution, and their roles clearly defined as well. But that's one thing. The occupant of the office can then decide, however that person wants to decide, to use that office for particular purposes. We've already had instances of that over the recent past, last 5, 6, 7 years. So we seem to have short memories about state capture. Or I don't know if the SABC is shy about reporting on state capture. That's the first point. The second point is that, you know, I'm used to fake intelligence reports and other kinds of fake complaints. You might remember that when Mr. Fuzile, the then Director General of the Treasury, and I were in London on an investment show, Mr. Mabuza was there as well. And we landed at Heathrow Airport, and there's this message, come back immediately. Of course, there was no immediate flight to come back on, but we dumped Mr. Mabuza and a few other business leaders to deal with the investment show. But what was being shown at that time was a fake intelligence report, which accused me of all sorts of things, and then the fake intelligence report disappeared. So fake news, I'm sure as a very experienced journalist, Mr. Green, you are now becoming familiar with. So I can respond to all of the things, but it's in the affidavit, and I'm sure you will have read what we have to say about the various so-called meetings that have happened or not happened. Another clear example would be the establishment of the investigative unit at SARS. We have lawyer after lawyer, including judge after judge, Kroon, Nugent, saying nothing improper was done. Now we come back and say something improper was done. In fact, the public finds it quite ridiculous that something that might have happened 7 or 8 years ago or 10 years ago is now revived in a systematic way at the behest of the same individuals in order to make sure that our job, which is to fix SOEs, is interfered with. And the question we should really be asking is why the interference with this business that we have to do, which is get the SOEs to do the work that they're supposed to do and make the contribution to job creation and the growth in the economy that we all require as 57 million South Africans. So the legal process, as I think the Public Protector's statement today says very clearly, and the law says, the legal process allows anybody who is the subject of investigation and on whom remedial actions have been proposed to actually have them reviewed. I'm not doing anything extraordinary. I'm exercising my right under the law and under the Constitution, just as much as the current occupant thinks she's doing the same as well. But you know, there was an old book, let's see who are the old activists here, in the 1960s, written by a Communist Party activist called Eddie Rue. Do you remember Eddie Rue? Yes. Yeah? Time longer than rope. So time is longer than the law, as it is currently practiced. Time will tell who's been right and who's been wrong. And then we'll talk about what's really going on. And for anybody who's really interested in the welfare of this country, the question we should be asking is, each time the lawyers ask, in terms of the very same act, the Public Protector Act, what are the special circumstances in instance A or B or C, as a consequence of which you've decided to revive a matter that's 10 years old or 8 years old? You don't get an answer. So why aren't any of you questioning the Public Protector as to what's the reason? Because the law says there must be special circumstances. Is the special circumstance the origin from which a complaint comes, or is the special circumstance something else that can in fact be explained? So I think what we want to do is to focus on our job, get these SOEs going, so that by the time we talk to you in a year or two, we can proudly say to you that together with a new management team, together with a new board, together with a new business model or an amended business model, Entity A has turned the corner, workers can get their salaries, the economy can have investment from these entities and other entities, and business in South Africa can say, Eskom is now giving us electricity at a reasonable cost, Transnet is transporting our goods to the harbor at an appropriate cost and time and efficiency, and that our ports are working at absolute efficiency as well. And of course, that Denel is a self-sustaining organization as far as finances are concerned. And hopefully, SAA is still flying as well, importantly.
Thank you.
My question about the President and the Speaker is...
Oh yeah, if you look at the remedial actions, again, I'm not sure if you've read it. If you haven't, we can explain it to you afterwards. Each of the people that are respondents after respondent number 2 are people who are supposed to act on the remedial actions. So the interdict, the application to the court has 2 parts. Part A, which is an interdict to and that interdict is requesting the court to interdict the Public Protector from enforcing her remedial actions. Now, because these people are mentioned, they can respond to that. It's not interdicting them. It is interdicting the Public Protector from enforcing her remedial actions. Part B, as I explained earlier on, is the review of the report in its entirety. And both are within the law. I think we have to end.
Can we take a last one?
Let's- I'm unfair to DTI. Is waiting outside.
Evening. Thank you very much. John Fraser from ZA Confidential. Minister, given what you've just been saying, do you currently feel secure that you have the full backing of the President and of all your Cabinet colleagues? Because the sniping seems to be coming from somewhere.
Absolutely confident.
We will close it there.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
How you doing?
Okay, madam. How are you doing? You very warmly dressed.
No, I'm still battling with the flu. And
I am as well, as you can see.
It was freezing in here.
Right, so that was the Public Enterprises Minister.